welcome to the Lucy Kate Crochet channel. Thank you for joining me today when we are going to be talking about fixing crochet blankets. So there's a few different ways that crochet blankets, when they're used and loved and hugged and squeezed a lot, can just over time start to unravel, fall apart, stitches come loose. But also, as we know very well, occasionally you sit back at the end of a project and you look at your beautiful blanket and there's a little bit of a mistake. Don't panic. So firstly, I actually think handmade things, it's fine if there's a bit of a mistake. However, if it's just not something that you can get on board with, that is not a problem because we can fix those as well. So today I'm just going to quickly run through with you the ways that I find most effective for repairing crochet blankets and how you can do them. So we'll start with a really common one, which is when the loose ends pull out. I'll just quickly chat through a couple of ways to sort that problem, and then we'll go and look at holes and fixing mistakes. I'll put a little timestamp along the thingy at the bottom, so if you've got a particular problem you want to work with, just pop to the right place and hopefully that'll help you out. Let's get started. So this is my current problematic blanket. I made it, I guess, about 2 or 3 years ago. It was initially designed to be a throw to go on a bed, and I think I made it out of super chunky wool, and it's too heavy and too hot, even for the deadest of cold winter nights. It weighs an absolute ton. I made it at a time when I'd had a little bit of a break from crocheting, and I was just doing it, getting back into the swing of things, not really thinking about it, and I made such a rookie error. I did not cut my loose ends long enough. So periodically over time, they pop out. There are a couple of really nice, simple, quick ways to deal with loose ends. I've got a much longer video if that is a problem area for you that you can go and have a look at. But essentially, what I've been doing and will continue to do with this blanket is I'm going to weave the ends back in. And I'm going to do it for this one with a hook because the fibres that I've used are so big, they are really hard to do with a needle. And I have also left them too short. So if you've left them a bit short, which is what I've done, and it's a chunky fibre, crochet hook all the way, pick up the yarn and pull it through. Remember to change directions multiple times. Give that fabric a nice rub after it's in there to try and get the fibres all tangled together, and snip off any extra loose ends if you're confident that you've wedged it in well. Don't do it if you aren't, because you'll want those loose ends again later. If you've got a finer fibre or you've left slightly longer ends, then a needle, hands down in my opinion, is the easiest way to sew in loose ends, going backwards and forwards through different parts of the blanket. Alternatively, if your ends are just too stubby to do anything with at all, try and get the yarn that you used, tie it or rub it, make it a little bit wet and rub it together so that the fibres join up, and then use that to sew in as a loose end. That can work really well. And don't worry too much if you don't even have a particularly good yarn match for what you've made, because it's going to be hidden. We're hiding it in the material that you've created of your blanket. So even if you've got to use an alternative colour, don't worry too much. Now let's talk about holes. When I first started making crochet blankets years and years ago, and I made some for my daughter, who's the older of my children, and my nephew as well, who's born around the same time, what I found happen was that the circles, the central chained circles, came apart in granny squares. That's a really common problem, especially for people who use magic circles but haven't quite got the technique down when they make them. So that's the closed circle, which can look great in a granny square too, but they do, if you've not got them quite right, have a tendency to loosen up over time, and there's a few things that you can do to deal with that. So I would recommend either replacing that granny square. So you're going to take that whole granny square out. So from the inside out, unravel your work in that one singular granny square up until the point that you've either got a complete neat row, or that you're right at the edge of the granny square when it's joined to the rest of the blanket, and just replace it. And you can either do that using matching yarns, making a new square in the same way, or you can make like a signature square, one that's got a motif or something special. So you can do that, you can just replace a whole square, and that will not undo the rest of your blanket as long as you don't interfere with those other fibres. You can replace a single square in a multiple granny square blanket. Then we've got patches, and patches I love. Patches are so much fun. My friend Sarah recently repaired one of her old granny square blankets with some heart motifs that she'd made, and she just used them to patch onto the blanket. And you can hand sew or crochet them together, but hand sewing them on is generally easier for that. It doesn't have to be like a matching part. It can be something that's completely disparate. And there are examples through generations of history, all the way back to those beautiful Japanese ceramics that are repaired with sections with like, it's not, gilting's not the right word, but they put the plates back together and then they've made a deliberately really obvious join rather than one that is more subtle. They've almost highlighted the repair, and it's really beautiful, and the juxtaposition is actually really gorgeous. Grafting is another great way to repair a blanket, but in order to graft, so grafting is literally remaking the stitches that have come undone, and we can do that when we've got a blanket that's either unraveled so that we've got a nice long end that we can work with, or where we have the same colour yarn, and literally you get to the point where the stitches are interrupted, and maybe if you're following a particular routine or pattern you'll want to undo it slightly more and then attach that same yarn to your hook and just work along and just crochet it back together again. And although psychologically it can feel a little bit weird not to sort of be working on a fresh row but instead an inserted one, the principle is exactly the same. And finally there's sewing, and I know that sewing doesn't get all the love in the world from crocheters, but I really like the hand sewing aspects of crochet. I like joining my toys together by sewing them and things like that, but sewing is hands down the best way to repair certain sort of faults or problems that you come up with crochet blankets. It's fantastic for fixing missed stitches, especially if you're doing something simple like a single or a double crochet. Stitching through and pulling those layers together can make it almost seamless. It's really good as well for aligning things that have become misaligned or that were misaligned when you made them. The first few times people make granny square blankets, often when they're joining them together, they'll accidentally skip a stitch as they're attaching the two lines, and then there's a sort of jar within it, and you can fix that just by sewing through that part and into the other side. And that's a really fabulous use for it. Genuinely, tension mistakes can be really quickly fixed with hand sewing. Tension mistakes are not something that's going to sort of interfere with the integrity of your blanket, but if you sit back and you look at it and you're like, oh, it's 98% perfect, and you want that 100%, grab a yarn needle or tapestry needle, the same colour yarn, and you can carefully just tighten up your stitches by sewing through them in the blanket. So that's an overview of all of those ways of repairing them. If you want me to go through in more detail individual ones of them, I'm very happy to. As I said earlier in the video, there's a loose ends video that I think you might find interesting if that's one of your sort of problem areas. Go and check that out, and yeah, let me know in the comments section below if you've ever repaired a crochet blanket, you're intimidated about repairing them. Let's have a chat down in the comments section, and I'll see you there. Happy crocheting!